The day I signed the papers on a house that came with its own bulldozer, I figured my biggest problem would be learning how to change its oil. I certainly didn't think HOA bylaws would be the first thing I'd have to demolish. But life, as it turns out, has a funny way of handing you a shovel. Or in my case, a 30-ton Caterpillar D6, and telling you to dig in. It all started because I was done. Done with the city, done with the noise, done with neighbors who could hear me sneeze through the paper-thin walls. I'm a software architect, which is a fancy way of saying I stare at colored text on a black screen for 8 hours a day so that people can get their artisanal cat food delivered 2% faster. The job pays well, but it was slowly sucking the soul out of me. My wife, Sarah, a graphic designer with a green thumb and the patience of a saint for putting up with me, felt the same way. We craved quiet. We craved space. We craved a place where the loudest sound was the wind in the trees, not a domestic dispute over who forgot to buy oat milk. We found it in Whispering Pines Estates. The name alone should have been a red flag, dripping with the kind of manufactured serenity that usually masks a deep well of suburban psychosis. But the property was perfect. 5 acres of rolling hills dotted with oak and pine, backing up onto a sprawling nature preserve in the foothills of Southern California. The house was a modest but solid ranch style, and as we walked the property line with the owner, a grizzled old-timer named Frank, he pointed to a large barn set away from the house. "She comes with the place," he said, patting the rust-streaked yellow flank of a machine that looked like it had personally won World War II. It was a bulldozer, an honest-to-God, track-wheeled, hydraulic-bladed monster. "What on earth do I need that for?" I asked, my city-soft hands already feeling phantom calluses. Frank just squinted at the distant hills, a knowing smile playing on his lips. "It's fire country, son. You'll need her more than you think." He called her Big Bertha. I laughed it off, thinking it was a charmingly rustic quirk. We bought the place, moved in, and for 2 glorious weeks, it was everything we'd dreamed of. I set up my office with a view of the deer nibbling on our lawn. Sarah started a garden that looked like something out of a magazine. I even spent a weekend learning how to start Bertha, the roar of her old diesel engine a satisfyingly primal sound in the quiet air. Life was good. And then I met Brenda. She arrived on a Tuesday morning, marching up our gravel driveway with the determined stride of a drill sergeant inspecting the barracks. She was a woman in her late 50s, with a helmet of blonde hair that looked like it could deflect small arms fire, and a pastel pink visor that she wore, inexplicably, indoors. In her hands, she held a wicker basket containing a single cellophane-wrapped muffin, and a binder the size of the Gutenberg Bible. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she announced, her voice a weapon of passive aggression. "I'm Brenda Schmidt, president of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association." "Alex Henderson," I said, shaking her hand. It felt like grabbing a handful of twigs. "Nice to meet you." "We'll see," she said, her eyes scanning past me, cataloging every inch of my property. "This is your welcome packet. It contains the community covenants, conditions, and restrictions. I suggest you familiarize yourself with it immediately." She thrust the binder into my chest. The muffin felt like an afterthought. "I've already noticed a few minor infractions you'll want to address." I blinked. "Infractions? We've been here 2 weeks." "Vigilance is key to maintaining community standards," she chirped. Her gaze sharpened. "Article 4, Section B clearly states that all refuse containers must be stored out of public view, except on designated collection days. Yours are visible from the road." She then pointed a perfectly manicured finger toward Sarah's new garden. "And that gnome, whimsical lawn decor, is subject to review by the Architectural Committee. See Article 9. I was speechless. She wasn't done. Her eyes narrowed towards the barn. And that thing. I followed her gaze to where Bertha's blade was just visible. That's my bulldozer. Article 7, Section C, prohibits the storage of commercial, industrial, or agricultural machinery in residential view, she recited, as if reading from a holy text. It's behind the barn, I protested. You'd need satellite imaging to see it from the street. Brenda's smile was thin and triumphant. I have excellent eyesight, Mr. Henderson, and a very strong sense of community standards. She gave a final dismissive glance around. Correct these issues by Friday. Welcome to Whispering Pines. She turned and marched back down the driveway, leaving me standing there with a useless muffin and a 3-pound manual on how to properly live a life of quiet desperation. The official violation notice arrived 2 days later via certified mail, which felt a bit excessive for a gnome-related offense. Fed up, I looked up the neighborhood directory and called the guy who lived at the end of our cul-de-sac, a name I'd remembered from the mailbox, Dave Kowalski. An older guy answered on the second ring. Dave here. Hi, Dave. My name is Alex Henderson. I just moved in up the street. I think I'm in trouble with the gnome police. A deep, hearty laugh echoed down the line. You've met Brenda. Let me guess. She gave you the binder of sorrows? And a muffin that could be used as a paperweight, I confirmed. Son, welcome to the club. What can I do for you? I explained the list of violations, and when I got to the bulldozer, Dave sighed. Yeah, she's got a thing about, well, everything. But listen, let me give you some real advice. Forget the gnome. The thing you need to know about is the Firebreak gate. The what? At the end of our cul-de-sac, there's a service road. That's a firebreak. It's our emergency exit if the main road ever gets cut off. It's the most important piece of infrastructure we have up here. I had a vague memory of seeing a dirt road blocked by a metal gate. Okay. Brenda had a new gate installed last year, Dave continued, his voice losing its jovial tone. Said the old chain was an eyesore. This one is heavy-duty steel with a special padlock. And guess who has the only key? My stomach sank. Let me guess. The woman with the visor. Bingo. I'm a retired firefighter, Alex. I spent 30 years with CAL FIRE. I've told the board, that gate needs to be accessible. In a wildfire situation, you measure time in minutes, not committee meetings. She just won't listen. He paused, and the gravity in his voice sent a chill down my spine. She once refused to open it for a county crew that was doing brush clearance because they hadn't filled out her Arboreal Maintenance Request Form 12Cs. 2 weeks in advance. They had to drive 20 minutes around the canyon to get to the other side. He let that sink in before finishing. So yeah, fight her on the gnome if you want. But pray we don't have a real fire this year, kid. That woman would write a ticket to the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse for trampling her petunias. I hung up the phone and looked out the window. The late summer sun was casting long shadows across the dry, golden grass. For the first time, my peaceful paradise felt a little less like a dream and a little more like a trap. And parked silently in its barn, Bertha suddenly seemed less like a quirky piece of farm equipment and more like a very, very large key. The next few weeks became a masterclass in petty tyranny. Living under Brenda's HOA regime was like being pecked to death by a chicken. A very organized, persistent chicken with a clipboard. I received a notice that my grass, in the one small patch of lawn we maintained, was a 1/4 inch over the regulation 3-inch height limit. A week later, a formal complaint was lodged regarding the excessive and pungent smoke emanating from my barbecue. I was grilling chicken. Not a tire fire, just a couple of lemon herb marinated chicken breasts. The complaint suggested I consult the bylaws for a list of community-approved aromas. I checked. There wasn't one. I was tempted to start exclusively cooking cabbage and durian fruit just to see what would happen. The final straw before the real storm hit was our plan to install a few solar panels on a discrete section of the roof. It was an environmental choice, a financial one, and frankly, none of Brenda's business. Or so I thought. Our application was denied by the Architectural Committee, of which Brenda was the sole self-appointed member, on the grounds that the panel's sleek, modernist aesthetic did not align with the rustic, traditional character of the neighborhood. The neighborhood where half the houses, including hers, had massive satellite dishes bolted to their roofs. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Through it all, Bertha became the silent battlefield of our Cold War. Brenda hated her. She hated the sight of her, the implication of her, and most of all, the sound of her. Once a week, on Saturday mornings, I'd fire up Bertha's old diesel engine, just as Frank had advised, to keep the battery charged and the fluids circulating. The sound was a deep, guttural roar that echoed through the canyons, a beautiful noise of pure, unadulterated power. To Brenda, it was a declaration of war. After the first time I did it, a laminated note appeared on my door, held down by a rock painted to look like a ladybug. It was a printout of the county noise ordinance, with the section on disruptive machinery highlighted in angry pink. The following Saturday, when I started Bertha again, I saw Brenda standing on her deck a quarter-mile away, arms crossed, staring daggers at my barn. So I made a point of getting out of the cab and spending a good 10 minutes meticulously polishing Bertha's massive, gleaming blade with a rag, making sure to catch the sun just right so it glinted in her direction. It was childish. It was petty. It was deeply, deeply satisfying. This little ritual continued for a month, a silent weekly standoff. Then, the winds changed. It started subtly. The air grew hotter, drier. A relentless sun beat down, bleaching the green from the trees and turning the rolling hills to a brittle, golden tinder. The Santa Ana winds kicked up, hot, dry gusts that felt like they were blowing straight from a furnace. They call them the devil winds for a reason. They make your skin itch, your nerves fray, and they can turn a spark into an inferno in the blink of an eye. The sky took on a permanent, hazy, yellowish-brown tint. Fire season had arrived. News reports became a constant, ominous hum in the background. Red flag warnings were issued daily. Every conversation with a neighbor started with, "You see that plume of smoke over by the 15?" A nervous energy settled over whispering pines. You could see it in the way people obsessively cleared brush from their properties, the way they checked their garden hoses, the way their eyes kept scanning the horizon. Brenda, naturally, responded to the escalating threat with more bureaucracy. She called an emergency HOA meeting via Zoom to discuss wildfire preparedness protocols. I logged on from my office, Sarah beside me, both of us expecting a sensible discussion about evacuation routes and emergency contacts. We were fools. The meeting was a disaster from the start. Half the residents couldn't figure out how to unmute themselves, and Brenda kept referring to Robert's Rules of Order as if we were debating a Senate bill, not talking about how to not die in a fire. Dave Kowalski, the retired firefighter, was the lone voice of reason. His face was grim in the pixelated glow of his webcam. "Brenda, this is simple," he said, his voice calm and steady. "With the red flags we're having, that Firebreak gate needs to be unlocked. Not just unlocked, it needs to be chained open now. And it stays open until this danger has passed." Brenda gave a tight, condescending smile. "David, I appreciate your concern, but we can't simply leave the community vulnerable. An open gate is a security risk. It's an open invitation for illegal dumping, for teenage hooligans, for—" She paused, searching for a suitably terrifying threat. "For unauthorized hiking." A collective, muted groan went through the Zoom call. "Brenda, for God's sake," Dave said, his patience clearly wearing thin. "This isn't about hooligans. This is about giving residents and emergency services immediate, unimpeded access. A fire doesn't wait for you to find your keys. When that call comes, you have minutes, not hours." Brenda was unmoved. She adjusted her glasses and took on the tone of a kindergarten teacher explaining why you can't eat paste. "And that is why we have protocols, David. Protocols prevent panic. Unfettered access is panic. The gate will remain locked." She held up a finger to forestall any further argument. "In the event of a verified, board-certified emergency, I will be on site to personally oversee the evacuation. I will unlock the gate, and access will be granted in an orderly fashion, according to the resident roster." I stared at the screen, my jaw slack. Sarah whispered, "Did she just say she's going to be a bouncer for the apocalypse?" Muttering to my muted microphone, I said, "You know what else prevents panic? Not dying in a fire." The motion to unlock the gate was defeated, with Brenda casting the deciding vote as president. The meeting ended. The gate would remain locked. The very next afternoon, I was on my deck, trying to ignore the knot of anxiety in my stomach, when I saw it. It was miles away, to the east, but unmistakable. A thin, gray finger of smoke rising straight up into the hazy sky. As I watched, the finger thickened into a fist, then billowed into a monstrous, churning cloud of gray and black. My phone buzzed in my pocket. "A county emergency alert. Level 1 evacuation warning. Wildfire reported near Mill Creek Canyon. Residents of Whispering Pines are advised to be ready to evacuate." A cold dread washed over me. Be ready. It wasn't an order, just a warning. But I knew how fast these things could move. Driven by a deep sense of unease, I told Sarah to start packing our go-bags with the essentials. Then I got in my truck and drove the short distance to the end of the cul-de-sac. The gate was just as Dave had described. Heavy steel bars, set in thick concrete posts. A massive chain was wrapped around it, secured by a thick industrial-grade padlock that looked like it could stop a tank. And zip-tied to the bars was a brand-new, professionally printed sign. Its stark white background and crisp black letters seemed to mock the growing chaos in the sky. "Property of Whispering Pines, HOA, no trespassing. Access by appointment only." I looked from the offensively officious sign to the smoke column, which was now leaning sideways, pushed by the wind, spreading like a stain across the sky. Then I looked back towards my house, towards the barn, where Bertha sat silent and patient. Frank's words echoed in my head. "You'll need her more than you think." A terrible, wonderful, and deeply illegal idea began to form in my mind. An idea that smelled of diesel fumes and sweet, sweet rebellion. The situation went from bad to worse with terrifying speed. One moment we were under a "be ready" warning. The next, my phone was screaming with an alert that bypassed the silent switch. Level 2, evacuation warning. The creek fire is exhibiting extreme behavior. Residents of Whispering Pines are advised to be set. Evacuate if you feel you are in danger. Ash, fine as dust, began to drift down from the sky, coating everything in a ghostly gray powder. The air grew thick with the smell of burning wood, a scent that's nostalgic at a campfire, but primal and terrifying on the wind. I could hear the distant, faint whoop-whoop-whoop of helicopters and the low drone of air tankers. They were fighting it, but the smoke plume on the horizon only grew darker and angrier. It wasn't just a cloud anymore. It was a beast, pulsing with a malevolent orange glow at its base. Sarah and I worked in a state of controlled panic. We packed the dog, Buster, into his crate, grabbed the go-bags full of documents, water, and clothes, and loaded them into the SUV. Our neighbors were doing the same. the sounds of slamming car doors and anxious shouts replacing the usual suburban quiet. Then, the final alert came, the one that makes your blood run cold. Level 3, evacuation order, mandatory, go now. The creek fire poses an imminent threat to life and property. Leave the area immediately. Go now? No ambiguity, no suggestion, a command. We jumped in the SUV and I gunned it down the driveway, joining a small convoy of my neighbors heading for the main road out. But as we rounded the corner, we saw a horrifying sight. A line of red taillights, unmoving. A quick check of the local news site on my phone confirmed our fears. The fire had jumped the main canyon road a mile downhill. A massive oak tree, weakened by the heat, had fallen, blocking both lanes. The primary way out was completely cut off. Panic, real and electric, shot through our small community. There was only one other way out. The Firebreak. My phone rang. It was Dave. Alex, the main road is a parking lot. It's completely blocked. The Firebreak is our only option. Where the hell is Brenda? I don't know, Dave, I yelled over the rising wind. I tried calling Brenda's cell, straight to her smug, pre-recorded voicemail. I tried again. Voicemail. We all turned our cars around in a chaotic scramble and raced towards the end of the cul-de-sac. And that's when we saw her. Brenda was there, standing in front of her stupid, locked gate, as if she were guarding the gates of heaven. Her car was parked neatly to the side. She had her arms crossed, her visor pulled down low, a portrait of lethal calm in the face of Armageddon. A line of 4 cars was already stopped in front of her, their drivers pleading with her. The wind whipped at her blonde helmet of hair, but it didn't move. Of course it didn't. I slammed the SUV in park and jumped out, the heat hitting me like a physical blow. Embers, some the size of quarters, were now drifting through the air, glowing like malevolent fireflies. Minute 1. The decision. Brenda! I screamed, running towards her. Open the gate, now! She turned to me, her expression one of profound annoyance, as if I were complaining about the color of the petunias. There is an order to this, Mr. Henderson. We must remain calm. I need to verify that each resident is in good standing with their monthly dues before granting emergency access. Dave, leaning out of his truck window, let out a roar of pure disbelief. Are you insane, woman? We are going to burn to death. But Brenda was in her element. This was the moment she had been training for. Not the fire, but the enforcement of rules in the face of chaos. It was the culmination of her life's work. It was then that I knew. Reason had left the building. Logic had been incinerated. There was no talking to this woman. I looked at the terrified faces of my neighbors. I saw Mrs. Gable from down the street, clutching her cat carrier, tears streaming down her face. I saw the Jensens with their 2 small kids in the back seat, their eyes wide with fear. I looked back at Sarah in our car, her face pale, and then at the ridge behind our houses. It was no longer a glow. I could see the flames themselves, a roiling 100-foot-high wall of orange, devouring the trees and roaring like a freight train. The fire was no longer 10 minutes away. It was 5. Tops. My decision was made. There was only one contingency plan. Minute 2, the sprint. I turned without another word. Brenda started to say something about insubordination, but her voice was lost in the wind. I sprinted. I ran faster than I had in 20 years, my lungs burning from the smoke and exertion. I vaulted my own low fence, ignoring the scrape on my shin. Alex, what are you doing? Sarah screamed from the car window. Starting the contingency plan, I yelled back over my shoulder, my voice raw. Minute 3, unleashing the beast. I reached the barn, wrenched the heavy door open, and scrambled up into the cab of Bertha. The air inside was still and cool. For a fraction of a second, the quiet was surreal. I put the key in the ignition, pushed the starter, and prayed. The old engine turned over once, twice, then erupted into a deafening, beautiful roar. There was no time for finesse. I slammed Bertha into gear and drove her straight through the barn's back wall. Wood splintered and screamed. I didn't care. I swung her around, my heart hammering against my ribs. I aimed for my own picket fence, the one Brenda had cited me for having an unapproved shade of white paint on. It vanished under Bertha's tracks with a satisfying crunch. Then I plowed straight over Brenda's prize-winning rose bushes that lined the property line. Thorns and pink petals exploded into the smoky air. It was a baptism by landscape destruction. I was a man on a mission, fueled by adrenaline and a deep, abiding hatred for bureaucratic nonsense. Minute 4. The demolition. The sight of a 30-ton bulldozer rumbling down a suburban street towards an evacuation point is, I imagine, not something one sees every day. The effect was instantaneous. Panicked honking turned into a cacophony of supportive blasts. People were yelling, some were even cheering. I saw Brenda's face. Her jaw was on the floor. The smug confidence was gone, replaced by a mask of pure, uncomprehending rage. This was not in her binder. There was no protocol for this. I pulled Bertha to a stop, the massive steel blade looming over her precious gate like a guillotine. The heat from the approaching fire was intense now, a physical presence. I leaned out of the cab, the diesel fumes mixing with the smoke. "Last chance, Brenda!" I bellowed over the engine's roar. "Move!" She held up her phone, her hand trembling with fury. "You are destroying HOA property. I am recording this for the sheriff. You will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." That was her answer. I gave a short, sharp nod to Dave, who gave me a grim thumbs up. I took a deep breath, lowered the blade until it bit into the asphalt, and pushed the throttle forward. The sound was apocalyptic. It wasn't the clean snap I expected. It was a tortured, grinding scream of metal on metal. The padlock shattered. The chain snapped like a rubber band. The steel bars of the gate bent, twisted, and then the entire structure was ripped from its concrete footings. I didn't stop. I kept pushing, shoving the mangled pretzel of steel and concrete 20 feet down the dirt road, carving a path wide enough for a semi-truck. I had not just opened a gate. I had created a new, much more effective one. I backed Bertha up, laying on the horn, a deep, resonant blart that echoed my triumph. I gestured wildly with my arm. "Go, go, go!" The exodus began. Dave's truck was the first one through, followed by the Jensens, Mrs. Gable, and the rest. A stream of headlights cut through the smoke. I waited until the last car was through before maneuvering Bertha off to the side, leaving her there like a guardian sentinel. I jumped out, ran to my SUV, and peeled out onto the Firebreak road, Buster barking his head off in the back. As we sped away into the relative safety of the smoke-filled valley, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The last thing I saw of Whispering Pines was a wall of flame cresting the ridge, and, far below, a small, solitary figure standing amidst the wreckage of her gate, covered in dust, still screaming about bylaws into the roaring, indifferent wind. The evacuation center was a high school gymnasium that smelled of floor wax, stale coffee, and fear. Hundreds of people were camped out on cots, a chaotic cross-section of humanity united by the shared trauma of having their lives upended by a wall of fire. Kids were crying, Red Cross volunteers were handing out blankets, and a local news channel was playing on a large TV, showing terrifying God's-eye view footage of our neighborhood burning. Or, more accurately, the hills around our neighborhood burning. Sarah, Buster, and I found a small corner to ourselves. The adrenaline had long since worn off, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and a shaky, surreal feeling of disbelief. Did that really just happen? Did I really just do that? Buster, oblivious to the human drama, was just happy to be getting so many head scratches from strangers. Then the parade started. First, it was Dave, who came over and wrapped me in a bear hug that nearly cracked my ribs. "You magnificent bastard," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I haven't seen anything that crazy since my rookie year. You saved us, Alex. You really did." Then came the Jensens, their kids in tow. Mr. Jensen shook my hand with both of his eyes wide. "We saw the flames coming over the ridge," he said. We really thought that was it. Thank you." Their little girl handed me a half-eaten bag of gummy bears, the highest honor a 5-year-old can bestow. One by one, nearly every family from our cul-de-sac came over. They offered me water, snacks, and a lifetime supply of beer. I became, in the space of an hour, a reluctant, grease-stained, and deeply uncomfortable local hero. I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like a guy who had just committed a felony on live television, because, of course, someone had filmed the whole thing on their phone, and it was already going viral online, to escape a natural disaster exacerbated by a lunatic. Just as I was starting to relax, my phone rang. The caller ID was an unknown local number. I answered cautiously. "Is this Mr. Alex Henderson?" a calm, official-sounding voice asked. "Maybe," I said. "Who's asking?" "This is Sergeant Miller with the County Sheriff's Department. Sir, are you currently at the Northwood High Evacuation Center?" My stomach turned to ice. This was it. The long, or in my case, very short arm of the law had found me. "Yes, I am." "Good, we're on site. We need to take your statement. We have a Miss Brenda Schmidt here, who has filed a formal complaint against you regarding felony destruction of private property." He paused. "Specifically, a gate." "I'll be outside," I sighed. 2 deputies were waiting for me near their patrol car. One was Sergeant Miller, an older man with kind, tired eyes and a face that looked like it had seen every stupid thing a human being could possibly do. The other was a younger deputy who had a look of profound professional boredom, but his lips were twitching, fighting back a smile. And there, in the back of the patrol car, was Brenda. She was clean, her hair was perfect, and she looked out at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated triumph. She had found her order in the chaos. She had found a rule I had broken. Sergeant Miller gestured for me to come over to the hood of his car. "Okay, son," he said, pulling out a notepad. "Just walk me through it, from the top." I told him everything. I didn't embellish or try to make myself sound like a hero. I told him about the blocked road, the fire, the locked gate, and Brenda's demand to check everyone's HOA dues. As I was talking, Dave, the Jensens, and 2 other neighbors saw what was happening and drifted over, forming a protective circle. When I finished, Dave spoke up. "It's all true, Sergeant. Every word. I'm a retired Cal Fire Battalion chief. Her actions constituted a willful endangerment of at least 24 lives. What he did wasn't a crime. It was a rescue." The younger deputy was now openly staring at the sky, clearly trying to avoid making eye contact with anyone lest he burst out laughing. Sergeant Miller listened patiently, his pen scratching on the notepad. He nodded slowly, then walked over to the patrol car and spoke to Brenda through the open window for a moment. Her voice rose in a shrill, indignant squawk. Miller just shook his head and walked back to me. He pinched the bridge of his nose and let out a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the entire county. "So, let me get this straight," he said, looking me dead in the eye. "The fire was cresting that ridge." He gestured with his pen towards the distant orange glow that still lit up the night sky. "The main road out of your development was completely blocked by a fallen tree, and this was the county-designated emergency Firebreak exit route?" "That's correct, Sergeant," I said, my voice steady. "And she wouldn't open the gate because she wanted to check everyone's paperwork?" She was concerned, I said, choosing my words carefully. About our standing with the monthly dues. Miller closed his eyes for a moment. Right, dues. He opened them and looked at me, then at my supportive neighbors, then at the exhausted families in the gym. Look, son, here's the situation. Did you feloniously destroy an HOA gate with a bulldozer? By the letter of the law, yes, you absolutely did. Do we, the county sheriff's department, have much bigger fish to fry right now? Like, for instance, the giant wall of fire trying to eat half the county? Abso-freaking-lutely. He slapped his notepad shut. This is a civil matter. You and your HOA can fight it out with the insurance companies and the lawyers later. For tonight, no one is getting arrested for saving their family from a fire. Now go be with your wife. He turned to his partner. Let's go deal with something important. He turned back to me one last time. Oh, and Mr. Henderson? Yes, Sergeant? When this is all over, he said, a genuine smile finally breaking through his weary expression. Find a legal place to park that thing, and maybe send me a video of you taking out that gate. My wife will love it. They got in their car and drove off. A moment later, another deputy had Brenda get out of the car. She wasn't being detained. They just gave her a ride. She stood there, abandoned on the curb of the evacuation center, watching me walk back into the gym, surrounded by the very people she had tried to trap. For the first time all day, I felt a genuine sense of victory. The threat of immediate arrest had passed, but I knew the Battle of Whispering Pines was far from over. A week later, we were allowed back home. The evacuation order was lifted, the fire contained. The drive back into Whispering Pines was surreal. A thick layer of gray ash covered everything, and the hillsides were a blackened, alien landscape. But the firebreak had held. The firefighters had stopped the blaze right at the edge of our community. Our homes, miraculously, were all untouched, saved by a combination of skilled firefighting and, as Dave kept telling everyone, a rapid evacuation. The first thing I saw as we turned onto our cul-de-sac was the scene of the crime. Bertha sat right where I'd left her, a silent yellow giant coated in ash. And beyond her, the gateway, or what was left of it, was a mangled heap of twisted steel. My fence was obliterated, and Brenda's prize-winning roses were now just a collection of thorny, bulldozed sticks. It was a beautiful disaster. My first call wasn't to a lawyer, but to a local contractor. I needed to at least look like I was being a responsible citizen and fixing the mess I'd made. A guy named Gus showed up an hour later in a beat-up Ford F-250. He was a barrel-chested man in his 60s, with a magnificent white mustache and hands like catcher's mitts. Gus got out of his truck, took one look at the destroyed gate, another at Bertha, then looked at me and broke into a huge, booming laugh. "You're him!" he roared, pointing a thick finger at me. "You're the dozer dude. Holy smokes, kid, the whole town's talking about it. My grandson showed me the video. Legendary stuff." I felt my face flush. Yeah, well, I need a quote to fix all this. Gus walked over and kicked the mangled gate. "Fix this piece of junk, son. You did the neighborhood a favor. This thing was a lawsuit waiting to happen." He surveyed the scene, his experienced eyes taking it all in. "Tell you what, we'll pull this crap out, sink a couple of simple steel posts, and hang a lightweight pipe gate on it. Something a 5-year-old could push open in a panic, simple, functional, not designed by a lunatic." He scribbled some numbers on a pad. "And don't you worry about the price. I'm giving you the community service discount. Full cost on the materials, but the labor's on me. Anyone who stands up to an HOA Karen like that deserves a medal, not a bill." I was floored. "Gus, I can't let you do that." "You ain't got a choice," he said with a grin. "My wife would kill me if I charged the dozer dude for labor. Now you want me to do something about that fence while I'm at it?" While Gus was a breath of fresh, reasonable air, Brenda had been stewing. 2 days after we returned, a notice was posted on every door. An emergency HOA meeting was being held in the community clubhouse. The agenda had one item: to address the unauthorized destruction of HOA property by resident Alex Henderson and to vote on appropriate sanctions and financial restitution. I walked into that meeting expecting to be executed. Sarah held my hand, whispering words of encouragement. The clubhouse was packed. There wasn't an empty seat. Brenda stood at a podium at the front, looking smug and triumphant. She had her binder, a stack of photos of the destroyed gate, and a PowerPoint presentation queued up. She banged a gavel. "This meeting will now come to order." She launched into a prepared speech, her voice dripping with venomous glee. She spoke of wanton destruction, of reckless endangerment. The irony was lost on her. Of the flagrant disregard for the bylaws that held their very community together. She proposed I be fined $50,000 for the gate replacement and that a permanent lien be placed on my property. When she finished, she asked, "Are there any questions before we vote on the motion?" Dave Kowalski stood up immediately. "I don't have a question, Brenda. I have a statement." He walked to the front of the room. He wasn't yelling. His voice was quiet, controlled, and carried the authority of his 30 years of experience. He described exactly what had happened at the gate. He explained how fire moves, how quickly a situation can become fatal. He pulled up the county's own fire safety guidelines for communities in high-risk areas, highlighting the section that mandated clear and accessible evacuation routes. Brenda Schmidt's actions, he concluded, his voice ringing with conviction, were not just a violation of common sense. They were a violation of our trust and a direct endangerment to every man, woman, and child in this room. What Alex Henderson did was not an act of vandalism. It was an act of necessity, an act that likely saved lives. He turned to the stunned room. "Therefore, I submit a motion of my own. A motion to remove Brenda Schmidt as president of the Whispering Pines HOA, effective immediately on the grounds of gross negligence and willful endangerment." The room was silent for a second, and then it erupted. Someone seconded the motion. Brenda sputtered, her face turning a shade of purple I'd never seen before. She started screaming about bylaws and procedures, but no one was listening. An impromptu vote was called. It was nearly unanimous. Brenda was stripped of her power in a swift and brutal public humiliation. She threw her gavel down on the podium, grabbed her binder, and stormed out of the clubhouse, vowing lawsuits and vengeance upon us all. A new, much more reasonable board was elected on the spot, with Dave as the interim president. Their very first act was to unanimously pass a motion to use the HOA's Emergency Reserve Fund to pay Gus for the installation of a new, simpler gate. Their second act was to officially commend me for my decisive action in a time of crisis. The $50,000 fine was forgotten. I had won. Bertha had won. Months have passed. The blackened hills are already showing hints of new green, a stubborn reminder of nature's resilience. The air is clear, the sky is blue, and life in Whispering Pines has settled into a new, much quieter normal. The reign of terror is over. We can now grill our chicken and display our gnomes in peace. The new gate Gus installed is a masterpiece of simple, effective design. It's light, strong, and held shut by a simple pin that can be pulled free in seconds. It's a gate built for escape, not for control. A few weeks ago, a small package arrived on my doorstep from the new HOA board. Inside was a small bronze plaque. I went down to the gate and, following their instructions, mounted it on one of the new wooden posts. It reads, "The Henderson Emergency Exit, opened August 2025. In case of fire, pull pin. In case of HOA, start bulldozer." I'm sitting on my deck now, sipping a cold beer and looking out at that plaque. gleaming in the late afternoon sun. Sarah is tending to her garden, which is now gloriously, illegally, full of gnomes of all shapes and sizes. Every now and then, a neighbor drives by and gives me a friendly honk or a thumbs up. They still call me the dozer dude. I've learned to live with it. It's funny. I moved out here for peace and quiet, to escape the conflict and the drama of the city. Instead, I ended up waging a one-man war against a petty tyrant with a bulldozer I never wanted. But looking back, I wouldn't change a thing. I learned something important that day, amidst the smoke and the fear. Community isn't about rules and regulations written down in a binder. It's about the unspoken agreement to have each other's backs when things get tough. It's about knowing that common sense is sometimes more important than common law. And it's about understanding that sometimes the only rational solution to an utterly irrational problem involves 30 tons of American steel and a willingness to knock down a few walls, or in my case, a gate. I raise my bottle in a silent toast to my silent partner, parked proudly by the barn. Old Frank, wherever he is, was right. I needed her more than I ever thought I would. And you know what? Thanks to a bit of creative landscaping I did with her blade last weekend, my lawn has never looked better.